Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness crack open doors you never knew existed. Tiana Hughes wasn't supposed to be a hero. She was supposed to be invisible, just another tired waitress hustling under flickering lights, trading dreams for double shifts. But that night, in a faded, sapphire blue restaurant tucked into the corners of Cambridge, destiny came calling in the form of a lonely little girl with a broken arm and an even more fractured spirit. Tiana didn't know that while she gently helped the shy child eat her mac and cheese with one working hand, the girl's father, a man whose net worth could reshape cities, was sitting only a few tables away silently watching, heart cracking open. She didn't know her simple, patient kindness would ignite a chain of events powerful enough to reroute her entire life, tear down walls built by hardship, and resurrect a dream she thought she had buried forever. Sometimes fate wears an apron. Before diving into the story, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories. The sapphire table glistened under dim golden lights, its brick walls and velvet booths giving off the illusion of quiet luxury. But beneath the curated charm, the place ran on frayed nerves, thinning patience, and managers like Darren Clean, men who believed control meant cruelty. Tiana knew this world too well. She knew how to dodge the burn of a careless kitchen hand, how to balance a tray even when her shoes had worn through, how to swallow humiliation so deeply it barely left a taste. That night had started no differently. A shattered glass, a public scolding, a pay docked without appeal. She didn't protest. What good would it have done? Her mother's mounting medical bills were louder than pride, heavier than any insult. And yet, as she rushed from table to table, refilling waters, adjusting plates, absorbing complaints like a sponge, a small voice tugged at the frayed edges of her focus. At table 15, nestled away from the bustle, a child waited, alone, forgotten. The other servers had all sidestepped the table, seeing only the inconvenience, a wheelchair, a cast, a complication. But Tiana saw something else, loneliness wrapped in a too-big jacket and guarded by a stiff cast. Without hesitation, she crossed the room. Kneeling so she wouldn't loom over the girl, she introduced herself with a smile that she summoned from reserves she didn't know she still had. "I'm Tiana. I'll be taking care of you tonight." The girl looked up, wide, wary eyes, a tangle of blonde hair. Fear stitched into the way she sat, hunched as if bracing for impact. "Laya," came the whisper. It barely reached Tiana's ears, but it landed in her heart. Tiana offered her a choice of drinks, speaking gently, as if laying down stepping stones across a chasm. Strawberry lemonade became their first bridge, and when the food arrived, when Leia struggled to wield her fork with her left hand, Tiana didn't hesitate. She pulled up a chair without asking, because sometimes kindness doesn't ask permission. "You know," Tiana said lightly, as she adjusted the napkin under Leia's cast, "when one part of you gets hurt, the rest learns to carry the weight. You're already adapting. That's what brains do. They're amazing." Leia blinked at her, the wariness beginning to thaw. "You were a doctor?" she asked, voice small but curious. "I was studying to be one," Tiana replied, the truth sticking in her throat. "But life had other plans." Not bitterness, just fact. She showed Leia a new way to grip her fork, supported her wrist just enough, guided her to a successful bite. And when Leia managed it, when she conquered that tiny mountain, the spark that lit her face was brighter than any tip Tiana had ever earned. Across the room, unseen by most, a man in a gray overcoat watched. Not the way men sometimes watch tired waitresses with cold appraisal. No, his gaze was different, intense, measured, hopeful. Miles Whitaker didn't look like one of the richest men in America. Not tonight. He looked like a father on the verge of breaking. He had watched therapist after therapist fail to reach his daughter, had sat through session after session where Leia barely spoke, barely smiled. And now here, in the noise and bustle of a downtown restaurant, he was witnessing the impossible. Leia giggling, relaxing, trusting, because of a woman in worn sneakers and a faded apron. Because of Tiana. At the bar, Darren barked orders. Another customer complained about a lukewarm steak. Somewhere, a dishwasher dropped a plate with a crash. But at table 15, A tiny world had formed, a safe place where broken bones and broken hearts could begin to mend. And as the night wore on, Tiana didn't just serve dinner, she served hope. She listened when no one else would. She laughed at crooked cat drawings. She celebrated every small victory as if it were a feast. She didn't know the man watching 2 tables away had the power to change her life. She didn't know that every word, every smile, every moment of grace was being carefully, quietly cataloged by someone who had spent years looking for exactly this kind of heart. But she would know soon enough, because sometimes when the world tries to bury you, it plants you instead. And under the right light, even in a restaurant full of broken glasses and broken dreams, you bloom. At table 15, the evening unfolded not with grand gestures or sweeping drama, but with something infinitely rarer: real connection. Tiana returned to her other tables with swift professionalism, topping off waters, clearing plates, but every few minutes her path would naturally lead her back to Laya. A small word of encouragement here, a quiet joke there. Nothing overbearing, nothing forced. She treated Laya not as a burden to be managed, but as a person to be respected. And Laya responded the way all children do when treated with dignity. She bloomed. Meanwhile, Miles Whitaker sat in his booth, sipping his untouched wine, doing what few powerful men are willing to do: wait and watch. He had come to the sapphire table planning to lecture his daughter gently about independence and patience. He had rehearsed apologies in his head for being late again. He had prepared to console her disappointment. Instead, he found himself conducting a different kind of test, one he hadn't consciously designed but knew he couldn't ignore. What kind of person shows true compassion when no one is watching? Who treats the overlooked, the inconvenient, the small, with patience and care, even when there's nothing to gain? He had spent decades surrounded by people who smiled at his money and bowed to his influence. But here, in a restaurant he technically owned but rarely visited, he found something rare enough to be called priceless: authenticity. When Tiana knelt beside Laya to help her reposition her cast without embarrassment, when she laughed, genuinely laughed, at the crooked cat drawing, when she defended Laya against Darren's scolding without a hint of anger in her voice, Miles knew this wasn't luck. This wasn't performance. This was who she was. And he decided in that instant that the woman in the scuffed sneakers was going to be part of their lives, if she was willing. But first, he needed to understand more. He flagged down a junior manager, someone he recognized vaguely from staffing reports, and inquired casually about the waitress with the bun and the navy apron. The answers he received: low pay, overworked, always first to volunteer for difficult shifts, painted a bleak but unsurprising picture. In most places like this, the hardest workers were the first ones overlooked. And then he asked the question that sealed his decision: is she reliable? The junior manager nodded immediately. If we had 3 Tianas, this place would run itself. Miles smiled thinly, a plan already forming. Meanwhile, across the restaurant, Tiana was helping Laya plot an entire comic book series based around Crash the Cat, a mischievous feline who battled gravity itself, armed with crutches, bravery, and a fierce imagination. Laya's giggles floated through the restaurant like birdsong after a long winter. Other guests began to notice. At nearby tables, conversations quieted as heads turned toward the sound. Not out of annoyance, but out of surprise, and then, unexpectedly, smiles. Even the exhausted bartender paused, watching the girl who had arrived so solemn now animated and bright. It was a small miracle unfolding before their eyes, but not everyone appreciated it. Behind the bar, Darren's scowl deepened. He didn't see a breakthrough. He saw a waitress wasting time, a customer distracting others, a potential problem that might ripple up to his boss, whoever that faceless owner was, and threaten his comfortable little kingdom. He barked orders, slammed glasses onto the bar, shot glares in Tiana's direction, but Tiana ignored it all. She saw only the child who needed a hand to hold, a voice to trust, a world to escape into for just a little while. When Miles finally rose from his booth, smoothing the fine wool of his overcoat, he didn't approach immediately. He waited until Tiana dropped off the check with a warm word to Laya. Only then did he step forward. The conversation was brief. A few soft words, $100 bill discreetly passed, not as a tip, but as a thank you. A promise made without needing to be spoken. You made this evening easier than it should have been, he said quietly. Tiana, ever professional, tried to brush it off with a smile. Just doing my job. But Miles shook his head once, firmly. No, he said. You were doing far more than that. Then he walked away, leaving Tiana blinking after him. She didn't even catch his name. Didn't know the storm he was about to unleash. Didn't realize that this quiet, battered night, filled with broken glasses and broken hearts, was about to become the pivot point of her entire life. And just as Tiana turned back to clear Laya's table, Darren's bark shattered the fragile magic. Tiana, office, now! Tiana caught the flicker of worry in Laya's eyes. She caught the shift in Miles Whitaker's posture. No longer casual, but alert. She caught the feeling in her gut that tonight would not end quietly. Without a word, she squared her shoulders and followed Darren toward the back hallway. Every step she took felt heavier than the last. She didn't know it yet, but she was walking straight into a confrontation that would rip the false shine off the sapphire table and reveal the rot underneath. She didn't know that 2 tables away, a billionaire had just made a silent vow. This woman deserved better, and he intended to make sure she got it. The hallway to the office was narrow, hot, and smelled faintly of fryer oil and mildew. Tiana's steps echoed on the scuffed linoleum, each one carrying the weight of exhaustion and something else, a growing defiance she hadn't felt in years. Darren didn't wait for her to catch up. He barreled into the cramped office, letting the door swing halfway closed behind him. Close it, he barked. Tiana obeyed, pushing it shut with a soft click. The office looked like a forgotten relic. Stacked invoices, chipped filing cabinets, a crooked poster advertising a lobster special that had ended 6 months ago. In the middle of it all sat Darren, slouched in his fake leather chair, fingers drumming impatiently on a stained desk. You want to explain yourself? He demanded, his voice already edged with anger. Tiana stood straight. I was helping a guest. Darren scoffed, shaking his head. You think this is a community center? She's a customer, not a charity case. You spent almost half your shift babying her while your other tables waited. I covered my section, Tiana replied evenly. No complaints from my tables. Not the point, Darren snapped, standing abruptly so that he loomed over her, trying to intimidate with sheer bulk. The point is that you wasted time. You made a scene, and you embarrassed this restaurant. Tiana clenched her fists at her sides. Her pulse thundered in her ears, but she forced her voice to remain calm. Helping a child isn't an embarrassment. Helping yourself to overtime and pity tips is, he sneered. Tiana flinched inwardly. The accusation wasn't just cruel, it was calculated, designed to twist the knife exactly where it would hurt the most, her pride. Darren pulled a thin folder from the mess on his desk and waved it mockingly. I've got complaints on you, Hughes. From customers, from staff. You're unreliable. You're slow. You spend too much time chatting. None of that is true, she said sharply. He grinned, satisfied to have finally provoked a crack in her composure. Doesn't matter. Perception is reality, sweetheart. And right now, the perception is you're a liability. He dropped the folder back onto the desk with a slap. Effective immediately, your hours are reduced. 2 shifts next week, maybe one after that. And if you don't like it, you can find somewhere else to whine. Tiana stared at him, not in anger, not in fear, in clarity. There it was, the raw truth. No matter how hard she worked, no matter how much she sacrificed, it would never be enough. Not here. Not for men like Darren who saw compassion as weakness and integrity as a threat. She thought of her mother sleeping in their tiny apartment, depending on her. She thought of the unpaid bills, the job she'd given up, the future she'd surrendered. And for the first time in years, something in her said, enough. You're wrong, she said quietly. Darren snorted. About what? About me, Tiana said, her voice steady. About what matters. About what people remember. She turned without waiting for permission and walked out of the office, leaving Darren sputtering behind her. The restaurant seemed to have frozen while she was gone. At table 15, Laya sat patiently, her sketchbook open, crayons scattered across the table. At the partition, Miles Whitaker stood, no longer a silent observer, but a man preparing to act. Their eyes met across the restaurant. And in that instant, Tiana knew. Something was about to change. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow. But the life she thought had been locked away behind the walls of duty and despair, it was still there, waiting for her to claim it. As she made her way back to Laya's table, she allowed herself one moment, one small, defiant smile. It wasn't over. It was just beginning. Miles watched her approach, and for the first time in a long time, he felt something close to hope. Not just for his daughter, not just for himself, but for all the broken things in the world that could somehow be made whole again. Starting with a tired waitress, a lonely girl, and the undeniable bond forged over crayons, courage, and a single unforgettable evening. The night air outside the sapphire table was sharp and brisk, biting through Tiana's thin jacket as she stepped into the nearly empty parking lot. Her tired sneakers crunched against loose gravel as she made her way to her battered Honda Civic. The same car she'd been driving since college, now more rust than paint in some places. She dropped heavily into the driver's seat, letting her head fall back against the worn headrest. For a moment she just sat there, her hands limp on the steering wheel, staring out at the distant streetlights blurring into golden smears. The thin envelope Darren had thrust at her back in the office rested on the passenger seat. She knew what it held even before she opened it. Tips stripped by the new pooling policy Darren had rigged to favor his favorites. A paltry $43 for a double shift that should have netted triple that amount. Tiana picked it up, crumpled it once in her hand, then smoothed it out again. Rage flickered inside her, but she tamped it down. Anger wouldn't fix the brokenness of the world. It wouldn't pay the pharmacy bill or the overdue electric. She had learned that lesson too many times. Instead, she folded the envelope carefully, tucked it into her bag, and started the car. The engine coughed twice before sputtering to life. The drive home blurred past in streaks of neon and shadow. She parked on the cracked curb outside her apartment complex, hauling herself up the narrow staircase to the second floor, careful not to wake the neighbors. Inside, the apartment was still. The kitchen light buzzed faintly. A pot of lentil soup, long cooled, sat forgotten on the stove. Tiana moved through the motions like a ghost, shoes by the door, purse on the hook, jacket folded neatly on the couch. Only when she reached the kitchen table, littered with unopened bills and grocery store coupons, did she stop. Something unfamiliar rested there, a thick, cream-colored envelope, propped against a chipped coffee mug. She frowned. Her name was written across the front in bold, careful script. Tiana Hughes. No return address, no postage stamp. She picked it up, heart hammering for reasons she couldn't name, and opened it. Inside was a simple white card embossed with a crest she didn't recognize. Whitaker Holdings, Cambridge office. The letter was printed on heavy textured paper. It smelled faintly of cedar. She read, Miss Hughes, last night you showed my daughter a level of care, dignity, and humanity that reached her in ways no specialist, counselor, or therapist has been able to achieve in over a year. You did this without knowing who she was, or who I am. That makes it even more extraordinary. I would like to meet with you. My driver will arrive at your address at 9 a.m. today. He will wait 10 minutes. Should you accept, he will bring you to my office. Respectfully, Miles Whitaker. Tiana sat down hard in the nearest chair, the letter trembling slightly in her hands. Miles Whitaker. The name buzzed faintly in the back of her mind. Half-remembered headlines and whispered rumors. Billionaire, CEO, real estate and hospitality empire, one of the wealthiest and most private men in the country. And his daughter was the little girl she'd helped last night. She looked toward the hallway, where the soft sound of her mother's breathing drifted from the bedroom. Bills cluttered the counter. The final notice on the electric bill glared at her from under a refrigerator magnet. 9 a.m. It was already past midnight. She had less than 9 hours. Tiana closed her eyes, pressing the heels of her hands against her temples. This was insane. People like her didn't get invitations from people like him. Waitresses with secondhand shoes and overdue rent didn't get second chances. And yet, and yet, she rose from the table slowly, moving on instinct now. She washed her face, brushed her hair back into a simple bun, set out the only professional outfit she still owned, a navy blue blazer, creased but serviceable, matching slacks, and a white blouse that had survived countless careful hand washings. She polished her worn flats until the scuffs were only barely noticeable. Then she knelt by her mother's bedside, checked the medication schedule Mrs. Chen had helped her prepare, and whispered, "I'll be back soon, Mama. I promise." By the time the sun began to creep over the rooftops, casting pale gold across the battered streets of Cambridge, Tiana Hughes was ready, not sure of anything, except this: she would show up. Because sometimes the door you've been beating against your whole life swings open when you least expect it, and all you have to do is walk through. At precisely 9 a.m., a sleek black town car pulled up to the curb in front of the crumbling apartment complex. Tiana watched from the window, heart hammering against her ribs. She adjusted her blazer once more in the mirror, ran her palms down the front of her slacks, and took a deep, steadying breath. This was it. The driver, a middle-aged man in a pressed uniform, stepped out and walked to the building's door. Before he could knock, Tiana opened it. "Tiana Hughes?" he asked, voice neutral but courteous. "Yes," she answered. He nodded once. "Please, follow me." The ride to Whitaker Holdings headquarters passed in a blur of city streets, flashing past tinted windows. Tiana sat with her hands folded tightly in her lap, rehearsing every possible scenario in her mind. What could Miles Whitaker possibly want with her? A favor? A job offer? Some kind of charity project? The thought made her stomach twist. She wasn't a project. She wouldn't be someone's good deed for the month. When the car finally pulled into an underground parking garage and ascended smoothly into a private elevator, she forced herself to breathe. At the 40th floor, the doors slid open onto a reception area that looked like something out of a movie. Glass walls framing sweeping views of the Charles River, modern furniture in muted tones, art that probably cost more than her entire year's salary. The receptionist, a polished woman in a sleek suit, smiled warmly. "Mr. Whitaker is expecting you. Please, this way." Tiana followed her through a set of glass double doors into a corner conference room, sunlit and sprawling, with a long table of dark wood stretching almost wall to wall. And there, standing by the window, hands clasped behind his back, was Miles Whitaker. He turned as she entered. Taller than she remembered, mid-40s, maybe early 50s, with streaks of silver at his temples. His suit was impeccably tailored, but there was a tension in the set of his jaw, a tightness around the eyes that no amount of money could smooth away. "Miss Hughes," he said, stepping forward and offering his hand. "Thank you for coming." Tiana shook it, firm and steady, despite the nerves prickling at her spine. "Thank you for inviting me," she said. He gestured toward the table. "Please sit." They settled across from each other, the wide expanse of the table between them filled only by the morning sun and an air of electric possibility. "I imagine you have questions," Miles said, his voice calm but intent. "Only one," Tiana replied, matching his directness. "Why me?" Miles smiled slightly, not patronizingly, but with something like respect. "Because last night," he said, "I watched my daughter, a girl who hasn't laughed freely in almost a year, light up under your care. I saw her trust you when she barely even looks at her therapist anymore. I saw someone treat her like a person, not a diagnosis, without pity, without pretense." Tiana said nothing, waiting. "I've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars," he continued, "on specialists, private tutors, counselors. None of them broke through." He leaned forward slightly. "You did." Tiana felt her throat tighten but said nothing. Miles reached into a folder and slid a sheet of paper across the table toward her. She glanced down. It was an offer. General Manager, the Sapphire Table. Full salary, full benefits, profit sharing. Tiana blinked. "I also know," Miles said quietly, "about Darren. About the environment you've been working in." Her eyes widened slightly. "I conducted a quiet internal audit last night," he said. "Your tip discrepancies, the schedule changes, the favoritism, the harassment. It's all documented. He placed another envelope next to the offer letter. He's been terminated, effective immediately. New policies are being implemented across all Whitaker properties to protect staff from exactly this kind of abuse. Tiana stared at the papers, feeling like the floor had shifted under her feet. This isn't charity, Miss Hughes, Miles said. It's recognition, compensation for value already given, and an invitation to do more. She looked up at him, eyes steady. And if I say no, then I thank you for what you did for Laya, and you go with my full respect, and a standing recommendation should you ever need one. Silence settled between them, heavy but not uncomfortable. Tiana thought of her mother, of the bills stacked like threats on their kitchen table, of the half-forgotten dreams folded away like old coats. She thought of Laya's smile, and she thought of herself. Not the waitress scrambling to make rent, the woman who had been meant for something more. She smiled, much small but sure. I'd like to discuss the details, she said. Miles's eyes crinkled at the corners. I was hoping you'd say that. And just like that, Tiana Hughes, daughter of a seamstress, former med student, forgotten server, took her seat at a table she hadn't even known existed until now, but one she was ready to claim as her own. The conference room hummed with the muted sounds of the city below. Taxis honking, the low rumble of a subway passing underground, distant construction noise. But inside, the world had narrowed to a few sheets of paper and a decision that could reshape Tiana's life. Miles Whitaker watched her carefully, not rushing, not pushing. It was the first time in a long time that someone powerful had offered Tiana something without strings attached, and that paradoxically made her more cautious. She flipped through the document slowly. The contract was thorough. Detailed salary information, health insurance that actually covered chronic conditions, dental, vision, a 401k match she hadn't seen since her Harvard days. And more than that, respect. A seat at the table, not behind it, serving drinks. Still, doubt whispered in the back of her mind. Could she do this? Step from a battered uniform and scuffed sneakers into managing an upscale restaurant? Could she cross that canyon in one leap? Or would she fall? Miles seemed to read the hesitation in her silence. I don't expect an answer today, he said. Take the offer. Think it over. Talk to your mother. Or ... He pulled another sheet from the folder and placed it carefully atop the others. Consider a different path entirely. Tiana glanced down. Community Health Initiative Coordinator, Whitaker Foundation. Focus. Pediatric outreach, underserved communities, mobile clinics. Salary higher than the restaurant management position. Benefits, full medical for family members. Her heart thudded painfully in her chest. You have a medical background, Miles said, voice low, respectful. I don't know the full story, but I know brilliance when I see it. If you ever want to return to that world, we'd be lucky to have you. Tiana sat back, stunned. Two lives dangled in front of her. The life she had been building, grinding paycheck to paycheck, keeping her head down, surviving, and the life she had once dreamed about before the world tilted sideways and crushed it beneath hospital bills and heartbreak. She thought of her mother, who had once worked 2 jobs to keep Tiana in private school. She thought of the nights she'd spent as a teenager, studying by the dim light of a shared bedroom, chasing a future no one had guaranteed. And she thought of Laya, a girl she barely knew but who had trusted her without hesitation. The door opened quietly. Laya rolled in, her wheelchair nearly silent on the carpet. She clutched a crumpled piece of printer paper, grinning wide. Dad said I could show you. Miles nodded once, stepping aside. Tiana smiled and bent down to meet Laya's eager eyes. The drawing was simple, 3 stick figures, a tall man, a little girl with a bright pink cast, and a woman in a navy blazer, standing under a blue sky. Above them, in childishly careful letters, it read, My heroes. Tiana's throat closed. It's us, Laya said proudly. You, me, and Daddy. Miles cleared his throat roughly behind them. I hope you don't mind, he said. She insisted. Tiana looked from the drawing to the girl's beaming face and felt something shift inside her. Something old and tired cracking open to make room for something terrifying and beautiful. Hope. Real hope. Not a lottery ticket kind of hope. Not a wish on a falling star. Hope built on real possibility, on being seen, on mattering. I don't mind, she said, voice thick. You'll come, right? Laia asked. You'll work with us? Tiana laughed softly, wiping a corner of her eye. I think I just might, she whispered. They spent the next hour sketching out possibilities. Miles explained that whichever role she chose, they would make accommodations for her mother's care, arranging home nursing visits, transportation to medical appointments, whatever was needed. No strings, no pressure. Just a thank you, he said, for bringing my daughter back to me. When Tiana finally left the glass tower, contract folder tucked under her arm, the air outside felt different, lighter, alive. The city buzzed around her, students on bikes, lawyers on cell phones, baristas handing out lattes. But for the first time in a long while, Tiana wasn't drowning in it. She was part of it again. She stopped by a park bench overlooking the river and sat down, letting the spring breeze tangle her hair. She opened the folder again, ran her fingers over the embossed seal. She could say yes. She could step back into the world she had been forced to abandon. She could build something new. The decision was hers, finally hers. Tiana didn't waste a second. She took a deep breath, pulled out her phone, and dialed the number at the bottom of the envelope. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from fear now, but from the gravity of the moment. She was taking back her future. She was choosing it. Rodman Pediatrics, how may I direct your call? A cheerful voice answered. This is Tiana Hughes, she said, keeping her voice steady. I'm calling about the fellowship position. There was a beat of silence, then a rustle of papers. Tiana? The receptionist said brightly. Hold one moment. Dr. Rodman asked to be notified if you called. Tiana gripped the phone tighter, her heart hammering. She watched the river ripple in the sunlight, thinking about all the places it touched, all the places she might go. After a brief click, a familiar, warm voice filled her ear. Tiana, Dr. Rodman said, sounding genuinely pleased. I was hoping I'd hear from you. I'm sorry it took so long, she said, her voice cracking a little. Life got complicated. Rodman chuckled softly, not unkindly. Life usually does. The important thing is, you're here now. I'd like to apply for the fellowship, she said. If it's not too late? A brief pause. It's not too late, Rodman said. I fought to keep a space open for you. You earned it once, Tiana. You'll earn it again. Come by the office tomorrow. Bring whatever paperwork you can. We'll make it work. The breath she released felt like it had been trapped for years. Thank you, she whispered. No, Tiana. Thank you, he replied. We need people like you. Our kids need people like you. She ended the call, staring at the phone for a long moment before lowering it into her lap. The breeze off the Charles River lifted a curl of hair from her forehead, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, she smiled without reservation. It was happening. It was real. She wasn't trapped anymore. She rose from the bench, folder still in hand, and made her way back to the battered Honda Civic waiting by the curb. When she pulled into the apartment complex, Mrs. Chen was waiting on the stoop, a grocery bag in hand. Good news, yes? She asked, eyes crinkling with hope. Tiana couldn't find words, so she simply nodded, laughing through tears. Mrs. Chen patted her shoulder and handed over the bag. Dinner, you celebrate. Inside the apartment, Dorothy Hughes sat at the kitchen table, a knitted shawl wrapped around her shoulders, sorting through a small stack of medical brochures. Her smile when she saw Tiana was tired but proud. You look different, Dorothy said. I feel different, Tiana replied. They ate lentil soup and rice together, and for the first time in months, the meal didn't taste like survival. It tasted like beginning again. After dinner, Tiana pulled out the letter from Miles Whitaker and read it aloud. Her mother listened silently, her hands folded together tightly in her lap. When Tiana finished, Dorothy shook her head in wonder. All because you were kind, she said softly. Tiana shrugged, tears burning at the corners of her eyes. All because someone gave me a chance to be more? She spent the rest of the evening filling out paperwork, scanning in documents, and preparing a resume that had once gathered dust. It was a strange feeling, like waking up from a long winter, stiff but full of aching possibility. When she finally crawled into bed well past midnight, she slept soundly for the first time in years. No nightmares. No fears about shifts being cut. No wondering whether she was enough. Just dreams. Real dreams. Bright, heavy, breathtaking dreams. Morning came golden and soft. Tiana rose early, slipping into her navy blazer and slacks again, feeling like armor had been strapped back onto her bones. She kissed her mother's forehead and whispered, "I'll be home soon, with good news." Then she stepped out into a world that was no longer pushing her down. This time, she was running toward it. At 9 a.m., she walked into the marble-floored lobby of Rodman Pediatrics, greeted with warm smiles and real respect. By noon, her acceptance papers were signed. By evening, she was enrolled officially in the fellowship program. In 6 weeks, she would be back at Harvard Med, white coat crisp, ready to specialize in pediatric neurology, the dream she'd once been forced to bury. But this time, it wasn't just for her. It was for every child who needed someone to see them. It was for every Crash the cat who needed a story. It was for every version of herself who had ever been told she didn't belong. As Tiana drove home, her phone buzzed with a new text. It was from Laya. "Can't wait to hear about your new adventure. Crash is ready for chapter 2. Love you." Tiana grinned, heart full. The future was waiting, and this time she was ready. The days that followed blurred into a rhythm of purpose Tiana had almost forgotten she could live. Mornings were filled with clinical rotations at Rodman Pediatrics, afternoons spent buried in textbooks at Harvard, evenings returning home to prepare her mother's medications and tell her about everything she'd learned that day. Each night, as she closed her eyes, she no longer felt the crushing weight of hopelessness pressing down on her chest. Instead, she felt something lighter, more buoyant, a certainty that the sacrifices she and her mother had made were finally leading somewhere worth reaching. It wasn't easy. Nothing about it was easy. There were days when exhaustion gnawed at her bones, when financial paperwork for scholarships threatened to drown her in bureaucracy, when the ache in her muscles reminded her of the double shifts she had once endured just to survive. But through it all, Tiana pushed forward. And she wasn't alone anymore. Every Friday evening there was a tradition, a small one, but one that meant the world to her. Tiana would leave the hospital, drive across town, and meet Laya and Miles Whitaker for dinner. Not at the Sapphire table, but at a small, cozy diner tucked away near Harvard Square. It was their sanctuary, a place where titles and tragedies didn't follow them through the door. They'd eat burgers and laugh over spilled milkshakes. Laya would show off her latest drawings. Crash the cat had grown into an entire universe now, filled with colorful sidekicks and outrageous adventures. Miles, still wearing the tailored suits of a man who ran an empire, always shed them like a second skin when he sat down with them, ordering too many fries, listening intently to his daughter, sometimes staying long after closing time just to soak it all in. It was during one of those dinners, late in October when the first chill of autumn kissed the windows, that Miles slid a small velvet box across the table. Tiana stared at it, confused. "This isn't—" she started, alarmed. He chuckled, raising his hands in surrender. "Not that. Open it." Inside was a simple silver pin shaped like a violin, delicate and exquisite. "For your white coat," Miles said. His voice was quiet, almost rough. "So you never forget who you are, and who you helped my daughter remember she could be." Tiana blinked hard, fighting back tears. She reached across the table and squeezed his hand once, a silent thank you too big for words. Later that night, when she fastened the pin to her coat pocket, it felt like a promise, etched not in metal, but in blood, in sacrifice, in love. She wasn't just rebuilding her life anymore. She was building a legacy. The first time Tiana walked into the newly completed Laya Whitaker Center for Pediatric Rehabilitation, it took her breath away. Floor-to-ceiling windows flooded the lobby with golden light. Colorful murals commissioned from local artists and featuring Laya's drawings of Crash and his sidekicks decorated the walls. But it wasn't the beauty of the space that undid her. It was the sight of children. Children laughing, learning, stumbling, and soaring. Children who looked like Laya. Children who looked like Tiana. Children who deserved to be seen, to be believed in. And all around them were therapists, doctors, volunteers, people who had been inspired by a waitress who once knelt down to help a lonely girl lift a fork with her left hand. That day, Tiana was asked to say a few words at the ribbon-cutting ceremony. She stepped up to the small podium, the white coat warm on her shoulders, her mother's face shining with pride from the front row. She glanced down at her notes once, then folded them, tucking them into her pocket. She didn't need them. She looked out over the crowd, parents, children, doctors, former classmates, even some old customers from Sapphire Table, and spoke straight from her heart. There are moments in life when you think the path ahead of you is gone, she began, when everything you worked for seems ripped away. But sometimes the path isn't gone. It's just rerouted. She smiled softly at Laya, who sat near the front, legs swinging from her wheelchair, grinning from ear to ear. I stand here today because a little girl reminded me of something I forgot. That kindness is never wasted. That hope has a way of finding you when you least expect it. She paused, letting the words settle. And when you choose to believe in someone, in their strength, their future, their light, you're not just changing their world, you're changing your own. The room was silent, not from indifference, but from the heavy weight of collective understanding. When she finished, the applause rose like a wave, filling the space and spilling out onto the streets beyond. Tiana stepped back, blinking rapidly, her hand resting lightly on the violin pin at her chest. Miles approached with Laya in tow, the little girl clutching a small bouquet of sunflowers. For you, Leia said shyly, because you're like the sun. You help things grow. Tiana knelt down, hugging her tightly, and for the first time in years, she let herself believe it. She wasn't broken. She wasn't trapped. She was growing. She was free, and the best was yet to come. Months later, the Whitaker Center bustled with life, a beacon in the community it had quietly transformed. Parents who once sat silently in sterile hospital waiting rooms now shared coffee in a sunlit atrium while watching their children explore art therapy, music sessions, and adaptive sports programs. Laya had become a fixture there, her wheelchair whirling through the halls with confident spins, her sketchbook tucked under one arm, and a growing team of Crash Comics fans trailing behind her. But the heart of it all, the steady rhythm that kept the center alive, was Tiana Hughes. No longer the tired waitress balancing shattered dreams. No longer the invisible server blending into crowded dining rooms. Now she was Dr. Hughes, pediatric neurology fellow, clinician, and mentor. Every morning she donned her white coat with purpose. Every patient she met, every young life she touched, was a testament not only to her skill, but to her soul. Her journey had been carved not from privilege or luck, but from compassion, resilience, and the unwavering belief that no act of kindness is ever wasted, even when the world isn't watching. One crisp spring afternoon, after a long session teaching children adaptive fine motor skills, Tiana stood in the therapy garden outside the center. Rows of vibrant flowers swayed gently in the breeze. Raised beds allowed even the smallest patients to garden, to feel the earth between their fingers, to watch something they planted bloom. She leaned against the wooden railing, breathing in the scent of jasmine and lilac, when she heard a familiar voice. "You always did look good around things that grow." She turned to find Miles Whitaker approaching, a familiar folder in his hands. This time, though, it wasn't a job offer. It wasn't a rescue. It was something different, an invitation. "I know you're busy," he said, handing her the folder, "but the foundation board would like you to consider something." She opened it. Inside were plans for a scholarship program, full tuition for underrepresented medical students, named in honor of Dorothy Hughes, Tiana's mother. Tiana swallowed hard. "We wanted to start with you," Miles said, "but eventually, it could help hundreds of students, thousands." Tiana ran her fingers over her mother's name embossed on the front page. Dorothy Hughes Memorial Fellowship for Pediatric Healthcare Equity. Her mother, still battling her illness with quiet courage, had been the reason she had walked away from her first dream. And now, she was the reason so many others might find theirs. Tiana nodded slowly, her throat too tight for words. Miles smiled gently, understanding everything she couldn't say aloud. That evening, Tiana sat at her kitchen table, no longer covered in unpaid bills, but in textbooks and patient charts and scholarship applications. Her mother, wrapped in a warm sweater, sipped tea across from her, watching with a contented smile. "You know," Dorothy said softly, "there were days when I thought I'd broken your future." Tiana looked up sharply. "Mama, never." "You gave up so much," Dorothy said, voice thick. "But maybe we were just planting seeds." Tiana rose, moved around the table, and knelt beside her mother's chair. "You didn't break anything," she whispered. "You saved me." They stayed like that for a while, the quiet evening wrapping around them like a blessing. Outside, the city buzzed on. Inside, the heartbeat of two women who had fought like hell for every inch of their lives pulsed stronger than ever. The next morning, Tiana returned to the center to find a surprise waiting. The therapy garden had a new addition, a simple carved stone near the entrance. It read, "Planted with hope, grown with love, for everyone who was ever overlooked, underestimated, or unseen. You matter. You always did." Signed beneath it, in neat script, T. Hughes. Tiana laughed through the tears that sprang to her eyes. The children gathered around, curious. Crash the cat made a sudden appearance, courtesy of Leia, now leading a group therapy art project. The center hummed with life, with joy, with endless possibilities. Tiana turned her face to the sun, feeling its warmth on her skin, and knew the struggles she had endured were not chains holding her back. They were the roots that had anchored her deeply enough to withstand the storms and bloom. She was no longer surviving, she was thriving. Not because the world had finally made room for her, but because she had built that room with her own two hands, brick by brick, word by word, kindness by kindness. And now the world, her world, was wide open, waiting, ready. Heron, if this story touched your heart, help us share it. Click like so that it can reach someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to our channel for more true stories of resilience, courage, and unexpected triumphs. And don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss the moment when the impossible becomes reality. Thank you for being part of this journey.